I'm going to just jump right into our text today. This is the lectionary text, the one that Jeff just read. It's John 10. Before I read some of the text, let me begin setting it up this way. A few weeks ago, Robbie and I and our daughter Carly and our youngest son Trey went on vacation, and we went to Italy. I know that sounds so pretentious to say that. We went to Italy, but we actually did go to Italy, and while we were there, we went to the Uffizi Gallery. Now, I'm going to say this. I am not a art buff. So I've been to lots of art galleries or museums, and my tolerance level is about 30 minutes. Now, if you've ever been to Uffizi, the Uffizi Museum, it is enormous. You have to go on and on and on. And one of the things that I discovered was probably about half of the paintings that were in the Uffizi Museum were Mother Mary and a blonde-haired Jesus. This is one of them right here. It's strange that they had a blonde-haired Jesus because most Italians don't have blonde hair. But this is European painting and Renaissance painting. So it got to the place where I just go, okay, I've seen enough of Mary. I'm fine now. My youngest son, who really isn't into the religious thing all that much, he said, okay, look, I can't go and I can't see any more of this. And he wasn't happy until we got to the end of the little tour where it got to the tortures of hell. And he thought those were the coolest paintings ever. And but one of the things about this particular gallery is it also has a huge section on self-portraits. I didn't see these ones, or at least I kind of missed them, but supposedly Rembrandt has a self-portrait in this gallery, and Raphael has a self-portrait, but there's two that I took pictures of. This one here is Da Vinci, and there you get a shot at what he looked like. And then Rubens is another one I got. I was going through trying to see if I recognize any names. And I took pictures of a couple that I recognize names. And here's the funny thing about portraits. A landscape gives us a place. An abstract gives us a feeling, but a portrait gives us a person. We have a picture of somebody that they painted about themselves. Currently, I'm reading a book for a book group I'm in called Rembrandt is in the Wind, which is in the first chapter, they go through the life of Vincent van Gogh. Now, I don't want to act like I know a lot about Van Gogh because I'm sure there's art people out here that are going to call foul or something when I say a few things, but this is from the first chapter of that book. First of all, Van Gogh was a tortured soul. He was not okay. Today, let's wait for the pictures, Ken. Thanks. He was so out of control in his village that the people that lived in his village actually contacted the police and created a petition to get him removed. He was staying with a guy, another artist, Paul Gauguin, and in a violent dispute with Gauguin, he chopped his ear off. I don't know if that's like trying to hurt somebody by hurting yourself, but he actually did, and I'll show you a picture of his self-portrait of that here in a moment. But there's all this very interesting things. A short time after he cut his ear off, or cut his lobe off, actually, a short time after he checked himself into an asylum. Now, this is the fascinating thing. In a single year that he was there, he painted over 150 paintings. He created, he produced, and during his lifetime, check this out, he painted 37 self-portraits. 37. While he was in the asylum, he painted several of those while there. And here are just a few of those. And Ken, you can go through these. These are Van Gogh's self-paintings or self-portraits. There's many of them. I'm just going to show you a few. Go ahead and go to the next one. All right, go to another one. Keep going through them, Ken. That's good. Another. And one, I'll give you one more. And here is the famous picture of after he kind of lopped off his part of his ear. Here's the thing. When you see the array of images, you begin to catch a glimpse of the person. Every portrait, self-portrait, answers one question. This is what it is. Who is this? Who is this? That's the question. The painter keeps adding layers, shadow and light and line and color, until a face feels like someone you actually know. This is exactly what Jesus is doing, I would suggest, in John chapter 10, our lectionary text. 6 qualities, and there we could probably pull a few more out of here, but I'm going to suggest we look at them as brushstrokes. He is painting a picture or a portrait who the Good Shepherd is. Now, before we look at the actual portrait, it's important for us to understand that there's a wall behind every painting. And the wall for this particular talk is context. It gives us a context for what Jesus is writing into. To feel what this portrait means, we have to understand what it is painted against. The prophet spent centuries, honestly, naming what was missing. And we could go through a whole litany of scriptures here, but like Jeremiah described or declared woe on the shepherds who scattered rather than gathered. Ezekiel devoted an entire chapter to leaders who fed themselves while the flock went hungry. By the time we get to John 10, his listeners, the people who are there, knew the silhouette of a failed heart by their stilted motives and their actions. Now, what has to be understood is most commentators, I hope you know that the chapter breaks in the New Testament, that wasn't written in. Those are stuck together by other people who put these passages together. And most people don't think chapter 9 and chapter 10 should be separated. And I'll tell you why. Chapter 9 is a story about a guy who was healed from blindness from birth. And because of when he was healed, the Pharisees who were there got all in a bunch. I mean, they really struggled with this, and they, even though he was healed, the official shepherds responded not with joy, but with a tribunal. It says that they interrogated the man, they intimidated his parents, and threw him out of the only community that he had knowledge of. Then Jesus, upon hearing what they did, he goes looking for him in verse 35. The religious leaders, by the way, I've redone this sermon 3 times because the first one I wrote was just about bad leaders. And we can find lots of that in here. The religious shepherds distrusted, they accused, and even verbally accosted this guy who had been healed from birth, from blindness from his birth. But the true shepherds sought him. And that is the whole sermon in a couple sentences. The darkness behind the portrait is not there to make us mad. It is there to contrast the portrait of the Good Shepherd that we'll see in John 10. So, let's take a look at that. I'm breaking it up into 6 different words. I don't know if it'll help you remember or not, but I'm going to try it. The first stroke of this portrait is trust. Here's the passage, and we'll project this for you as well. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The great gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. The first brushstroke is trust. Jesus comes in through the gate, it says, openly, honestly, nothing to hide. And we have to catch this next part. He calls his sheep by name. He doesn't see them as a category or a function or some sort of number. He sees them as a person. Isaiah heard God's promise this centuries before in Isaiah 43, where it says, I have called you by name, you are mine. So when we look at this first stroke, it's about trust. That is what Jesus is describing. He has been paying the same kind of attention to us, church. He knows your name. As a matter of fact, I was thinking about doing this song we used to do all the time. He knows my name. He knows my every part. And that's what this first part is talking about. The wonder of this first stroke is a claim about a person. The shepherd knows your name, and hearing it from him is the beginning of everything. Now, let me just give you a quick takeaway from this one. We are not anonymous to Jesus. We are not a number. We are not a project. He calls us by name, which means the first step in learning to recognize the voice is already calling. He calls his own sheep by name. The second brushstroke of this portrait is found in verse 4, and that is the word intimacy. Say intimacy. This is what it says. When he has brought out all of his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. Trust opens the gate. What we find on the other side is intimacy. We trust. That leads to intimacy. Jesus leads from the front. He doesn't lead from the back, prodding or whipping or some sort of coercion. He leads as the leader up front. There's something extraordinary here, church. The shepherd goes ahead not because he is indifferent to what the flock is walking into, but because he is willing to walk into it first. Now, every hard road we have has been Jesus has asked us to walk. Jesus walked in it first. Every valley, every threat, he's already been there ahead of us. The sheep follow because they recognize his name, though. I know I should have shown you a picture just to remind you, but Robbie and I have two giant dogs. We've wondered why we got two many, many times. We had one, and we thought, oh, if one's good, let's get another. And now we have about 320 pounds of dog at our house. They're very gentle, but we found that if someone comes to our house who is a stranger, these gentle creatures change. Like, when they see Robbie and I, even if it's pitch dark or whatever, they hear our voice and they come up to us, although they're kind of aloof, so they don't really come up to us. They just lay there and go, hey, if they do that. Nevertheless, they don't get animated about that. What they do is they recognize who we are, and that has been created over years now. They're 9, both of them are 9 years old, of us feeding them, talking to them, scratching their neck, hugging them, being present with them and active with them. But if someone comes, like let's just picture our backyard. There's a gate on the side. Picture our backyard, we're back there, and someone comes in that gate at night, they will not experience our dogs the same way we do. Why? Because they don't recognize that person. They don't have that trust. They don't have that intimacy with that person. The familiarity with the shepherd's voice produced a trust deep enough to produce courage and confidence. Genuine intimacy with Jesus isn't a feeling we have to try to get psyched up to get. It is a recognition that develops over time in the repeated experience of hearing his voice and finding it to be true. Henry Nouwen, many of you have read a lot of Nouwen, spent a lifetime pressing into this truth, and he wrote this: "To pray is to listen to the one who calls you my beloved daughter, my beloved son, my beloved child. To pray is to let that voice speak to the center of your being, to your guts, and let that voice resound in your whole being." Church, that's not poetry. That's a description of what happens when the sheep and the shepherd have been together long enough. We know this shows up throughout the entire Bible. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but if you've ever read Psalm 23, this is the story of Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. Let me just move this ahead. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely your goodness and your mercy, your love, will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. That is that intimacy that we're talking about today. The confidence is not the path will be easy. The confidence is that the shepherd will be there for us. The key takeaway here is intimacy with Jesus is not something reserved for the super Christian. When I first became a Christian, I was always amazed at people who prayed out loud really well. Like, how do they do that? It's so beautiful. And it would make me not want to pray out loud because I couldn't do it. Listen, this intimacy isn't for the super prayers or the super theologically astute or whatever. It's for all of us. All of us. It is the ordinary result of time near to recognize the voice, to get close enough that his voice becomes the most familiar sound we know. Let me give you the third one, freedom. Freedom is found in verses 7 and 9. I'll go ahead and project these for you. I am the gate for the sheep. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. Now, the metaphor opens towards spaciousness. Jesus is not just the shepherd. He is also the gate. The metaphor switches in the middle of this story. And what strikes me is that of generosity. The sheep come in, the sheep go out, they find pasture. Jesus, the good shepherd, has created an ecosystem of freedom. Church, I want to say, so often the church creates an ecosystem of control, of burden. And oftentimes people are injured by that. But that's not the story of Jesus. He does not have that environment for us. Think about what it means to be genuinely free under the care of someone you fully trust. Not anxious about the boundaries, because the one who holds them has proven they exist for our protection, not for our restriction. I'm going to talk about something I know very little about again. My wife is a therapist. She talks about this to me all the time. But the idea of attachment is very important. Attachment creates a security. We all have this need for security, a secure base in our life. And she's told me the story of, like, if a parent takes a little kid to the park, and depending if the child has a secure attachment to the parent, the kid can go further away from the parent because of the trust and the freedom. The freedom is created because of that trust. I think that's what we're talking about in this text right now. Freedom comes from knowing. We can go out into the world with confidence because we know there's someone somewhere that's safe to return to. Here's a practical takeaway. The life of Jesus is spacious, not cramped. If faith has felt like reduction or loss to you, like a smaller, more anxious existence, I want to encourage you to return to this image. The gate flung open, the pasture beyond, the shepherd whose security makes our freedom possible. Here's the fourth one. Abundance. Say abundance. Thank you. This is, there it is. This is taken from John 10:10. This might be one of the more familiar passages in the entire Bible. And maybe, I'm not going to get into this, but maybe one of the more misinterpreted passages in the Bible as well. I'll tell you the way I've read it. This is not a part of my sermon. This is free. You don't have to tithe or anything for this one. But I've read it as some sort of satanic attack. The thief is Satan, and the thief has come to kill, steal, and destroy. Just for context, think about what we've talked about up to this point, and think of John chapter 9, if that's the same passage. Who is Jesus talking about when he talks about the thief and the robbers? If you have your Bible open, just look at verse 1 of chapter 10. He's referring to the Pharisees who were bad shepherds. These were the people who were stealing and robbing. We can apply it to Satan if we want, but the context infers that it is the bad shepherds that he's talking about this. But the follow-up is, but the good shepherd provides abundance, life to the full, it says in verse 10. The Greek word here for full does not mean just sufficient or adequate. It means overflowing. Like if I had a pitcher here, or a glass and a pitcher, and I pour the water into the glass, it's not just to fill it adequately. It's to fill it so it's actually overflowing the edge. Think of the prostitute in Luke, I think it's Luke 7, that brings the alabaster jar of perfume to Jesus. And it says it has inestimable worth. And she cracks it and pours it on him. And the people in the room are just offended. Don't they know this could be given to the poor? And Jesus says, don't hinder her, because this was a gift preparing him for his crucifixion. Now listen, Jesus didn't need an entire bottle of this on him. It was a gesture of lavish adoration. And I think that's the thing we have to keep in our mind as we think of John chapter 10, verse 10. This is an overflowing. Jesus' constitution is oriented toward our flourishing. It is not a policy or even an idea. It is the nature of the person. Jesus, it's one of flourishing. His deepest instinct is generosity. He cannot encounter need without moving toward it. He describes his own mission as abundance. I don't know how you're experiencing your relationship with Christ right now, but get a hold of this one. Brueggemann said this, and I hope you understand this because it's creating a contrast for us. He said this: when we live according to our fears and our hates, our lives become small and defensive, lacking the deep, joyous generosity of God. Life with God is much, much larger, shattering our little categories of control, abundance, the full life. Abundance infers this generosity. If we operate from a scarcity mindset, we cannot keep our hands open and our hearts open, giving freely instead of clutching the things around us, like life is a zero-sum game. Abundance. The practical application here is Jesus is not reluctant toward us. He is not waiting for us to deserve the overflow. His ontology is generosity. The question is simply whether we're positioned to receive what he has already come to give us. Here's the fifth stroke. This is I think it's the most important. It's really the centerpiece of this. It's in verse 11, and the word I would use is sacrifice. This is what it says: I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. This verse is the epicenter of our entire passage. Everything in the portrait has been pointing here. The good shepherd lays down his life. The cross was and is the ultimate gesture of love. It is worth pausing for a moment to think about what's being described here. It's fascinating. Oftentimes when the word good is used in the New Testament, it's this Greek word agathos, which means moral character or something like that. But the word that's used here is not that word. It's kalos, which carries the sense of nobility or wholesomeness or beauty. Not only goodness of character, but an outward attractiveness, a loveliness. Jesus is not merely the righteous shepherd. He's the beautiful shepherd. He's the beautiful shepherd who lays down his life for us, the sheep. There have been tons of theological wranglings over the centuries about what happens on the cross. These would be called atonement theories. I'm not going to go into all of them, but let me just mention a couple. There's Christus Victor, there is substitution, there's ransom, and there's one that's called exemplar. And the fascinating thing is, for reasons that I don't have time to explain, the exemplar theory of atonement is not actually identified as a central piece for many people. But we have to understand, though, is this idea of exemplar is the idea of Jesus is demonstrating what this life would be, not only to die for us, but to show us what life fully looks like. Listen, the kalos shepherd is not just doing something on our behalf. He's showing us the cruciform shape of life. What I find most important here is the pre-decision. when we think about Jesus dying for us, and we have to admit there were challenges along the way, but his face was set like a flint toward the cross, all the way through the Gospels. This was at the very center of who we are. Before Gethsemane, before his arrest, before the trial, this was decided on. Our life, our name, which he has known all along. He saw us. Paul names this logic in Romans chapter 5:8, where he says, "For God demonstrates his own love for us in this, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us." Not after we got our life together, which is really the inclination most of us start with. I got to get this together so I can come to God, but that's not it. That's not this story. That's not this good shepherd. Every other quality in this portrait, the trust, the intimacy, the freedom, and the abundance flows from this particular brushstroke. A shepherd who would lay down his life is the only shepherd whose every other promise can be fully believed. So here's the takeaway. The cross is not only a doctrine to affirm, it is a portrait of the depth of Jesus' commitment to us, made before the crisis arrived, held through the worst of it, and still extended to us now. The cross occupies the center of Christianity. Let me give you the last brushstroke. This is the word integrity. It's in verses 12 and 13. "I am the good shepherd," it says. "The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep." The last stroke requires a bit of a shadow to make it understandable. It speaks of the hireling. Not a villain, but someone whose commitment was always conditional. When I first became a pastor, I was going through I think my first out of 3 ordination things. I don't know if you're supposed to do it that way, but I was going through an ordination interview, and I hadn't been a Christian that long, and I'd only read the New International Version of the Bible. And there's these older men who had never read the NIV, but only read the King James. And one of them innocently says, let me ask you a question. What do you think about hirelings? And I just looked at him like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't even know what that is. Unfortunately, the way the NIV puts this, it kind of takes the edge off a hired person. That takes the edge off of what Jesus is trying to say. He's saying the hireling, the one who is in it for the job, but when it gets difficult, moves away. That's the leader that goes the opposite direction. They perform the shepherd's role well enough in fair weather, but when the wolf comes, staying requires something he never intended to give. So he leaves. His departure reveals what was always true. He was never really the shepherd. Let me just ask you this. What are the things that define integrity for you? Can you just help me out? Let's kind of create a composite, if you will, of integrity. What does that look like? How do you experience integrity? Honesty. Good, perfect. Yes, alignment between word and deed. Say it again. Doing the right thing when no one is watching. That's actually a classic definition of integrity. Anything else? Willing to admit fault. When I think of integrity, it reflects a lot of what you've already shared. One who lives with an undivided heart, whose inner life and outer life align. That is really key. It's interesting, the Latin root for the word integrity is integer. Any math people here? No, I'm putting my hand down. What is an integer? It's a whole number, right? It actually comes from this idea of being whole or undivided or untouched or uncorrupted. I mean, the original Latin definition has nothing to do with numbers. It has to do with integrity of action and thought. This is so important as we look at this. Complete, intact, or sound. The sheep never have to wonder what version of the shepherd they're getting. They don't have to worry. If the hireling is watching out for the sheep have a different version coming toward them all the time. But the good shepherd is a shepherd of integrity. He is simply always the shepherd, undivided, present himself. There is a profound rest in that. The key takeaway for me is we never have to brace ourselves for a different version of Jesus. His integrity means that the shepherd who called us by name is the same one who has already decided to lay down his life for us. In our contemporary context, church, listen to this. There are so many people trying to sell us a different version of Jesus. Can I just say this? If the version of Jesus you're hearing sold doesn't look like this, doesn't look like the Good Shepherd, I think it's incumbent on us to reject that and even say it's false. Isn't that what Paul said in Galatians 1? If someone comes to you with a different gospel than the one I've given you, may they be accursed, anathema. Now, that seems very judgy in our context, but the reality is this is so important. This is who we are. And I'm just going to give you some Jesuses that I can find on the news this morning. Ready? The Jesus of war and violence. The Jesus of opulent prosperity. The Jesus of conflict. The Jesus that reads only from the Old Testament to define who God is. Church, listen to this. We have to, when we're interpreting who God is, we have to look at Jesus. Not the other way around. You don't look at the Old Testament to define Jesus. You look at Jesus to define God. You look at Jesus to define God. How about the gospel of whiteness? Those are gospels that are being sold in our land. Not exclusively, but in pockets, right? Where people are coming and giving a picture of what they say is the real Jesus, and it doesn't look like this John 10 Jesus. Not at all. So let me just wrap this up. Brushstrokes: trust, intimacy, freedom, abundance, sacrifice, and integrity. Jesus can be trusted. Jesus provides a pathway to intimacy. Freedom is the ecosystem that he created. There is full and abundant life through him. He lays down his life for us as a sacrificial presentation, and he is the same tomorrow as he was today. In an era where different portraits of Jesus are being hawked, tried to be sold, violence, war, whiteness, prosperity, the Good Shepherd must be declared. I would say we have to cling to it, to this picture, realizing that anything that comes like these other Jesuses comes with a cost. The distortion of Jesus deforms the church, number one, makes the church look like something and have it experience like something that isn't like the John 10 Jesus, and it steals the beauty of what the world is actually looking for. There is something beautiful about Jesus, the kalos. I mean, he is the beautiful shepherd, and unfortunately, with the distortions that abound in our land, those pictures end up showing Jesus as he really isn't, in a way he isn't. And I feel like we have to stand for that. We have to commit ourselves to that. He is the true shepherd, the good shepherd, the beautiful shepherd. And I personally, and we as a church, must cling to that picture. I'd like you to pray with me. O God, whose Son Jesus is the good shepherd of your people, grant that when we hear his voice, we may know him who calls us each by name and follow where he leads, who with you and the Holy Spirit lives and reigns, one God, forever and ever. And the church said, Amen.